All right. Episode 6.
Episode 6.
We talked last time about conditioning for an episode and a half, basically. The one thing that I was thinking a little bit about, I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are. Like we talked about, like working with coaches, things like that. But I think one thing that I forgot to mention is, like as for us as the strength and conditioning coach who, is most likely going to implement a lot of the conditioning, I think it's important to think about, like since we're the last ones that are implementing it, just because a coach has an idea, it's still our responsibility to keep kids safe. And I think it's easy to like not, to get caught up in, what coach wants and like an idea they have or whatever. But like at the end of the day, if something happens, not good, like has happened all across the country with conditioning specifically, like that's directly on us. So like if we know something's wrong or could be potentially dangerous or after like a break period, then we have to speak up and not do that thing. I was just curious what you guys thought.
I agree. I've never ran into that issue though, thankfully.
Yeah. With like a coach having an idea you thought was bad.
Or just, hey, we want to do all this as far as conditioning is concerned, and you're running it. I've had coaches that have done their own things, and I was just like, oh, that might be a little much, but I wasn't in charge of it, so
no. What do you think, Nick?
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one way you could maybe alleviate it is to kind of tackle that issue ahead of time. So like you're not coming off a break and the coach is just like out of the blue, like, I want to do this. And then you feel like you're on the spot and you don't want to disagree with coach, maybe tackle it before that even becomes an issue.
Yep.
Anything else before we close the book on conditioning?
Oh, that book will never be closed.
For now.
Legs feed the wolf, man.
What does that mean?
Haven't you watched Miracle?
Brooks.
Come on.
Whatever. Okay. To tonight's topic, the first one. I think we should start talking through how to organize training. Yeah. The monster topic. So like, like how to split up a day, a week, like more specific things. What order of exercises, things like that.
We can really get into the weeds in this one if we start.
Yeah. Well, let's start by not
weeks. We start talking about weeks and like times a year and like trying to work with practice and like all that stuff.
I think we should first talk through like just in general for like, an athlete or maybe even a non-athlete, how like, like if somebody walks into the room, like what are they going to do? How long should they spend on certain things? Like what's the flow, order of movements, things like that.
Nick, you go first.
Yeah, Nick, go first.
Let's tackle one fucking topic, okay? What do you want?
Session. Organizing.
Yeah, like,
from the second you walk in the room.
Yeah, like annual planning type stuff, which that's where it comes from. But I think just talking through like what a day looks like, or like I just wrote down, like total body part splits, worthless, whatever, upper, lower, but things like that.
Okay. So regardless of time of the year, I will have a person/group come in. We are going to warm up. The warm up will consist of several things, but I think the most important things are like prepping for the specific movements that you have in the workout.
What does that mean?
So like if you are going to squat that day, like you should have some form of like lighter squatting in your warm up, get the squat pattern moving and then kind of build up into your squat. But so you're going to have a warm up. I'll always have a power-based exercise to start. I'll have more of a strength exercise that follows the power-based exercise. And
what might be an example of a power-based exercise?
I use Olympic lifts.
We already talked about that. So if you didn't listen to it, go listen to it. Sorry.
Nice. Yeah. I mostly use Olympic lifts. I'll throw jumps in there. But I mainly use Olympic lifts, and then I'll use a main strength movement of the day. I keep those simple: squat, bench, front squat, whatever the time of year kind of demands. And then after that, I go to accessories that support maybe weaknesses or deficiencies I see in the movements before, or something I'm trying to attack that needs to be developed in that athlete or that group. And it kind of coincides with the time of year and what adaptation you're trying to chase. So if I'm at a time of year where muscular endurance and hypertrophy are what I want, like those accessories are going to be a little bit higher rep movements to chase that muscular endurance and kind of hit the higher end of reps for your hypertrophy stuff. Just to
So you're saying that those later exercises are based on either something you see wrong in the main strength movement, which is your squat, bench, deadlift, etc.
Whatever the weak link in the chain is.
Yeah, or like a weakness that you know about just in general.
Yep. Something that you're trying to develop.
How would you say like that how do you identify a weakness?
You watch the main power and strength movements, and usually people will have like a sticking point or like a technical deficiency where you can identify like what part of that movement is weaker, and then you can kind of identify what muscles or actions are needed to develop that specific part of the movement.
Like that.
So say if someone can't lock out their bench on those last reps, like I'm going to smack some more tricep stuff at the end.
Like just hundreds of reps of rope tricep push downs or what?
Hundreds of reps?
I don't know. You said smack them in there. What does that mean?
Means chase the adaptation using. This means chase the adaptation using a tricep based exercise. If you can do rope extensions, sure. You can do other exercises, whatever gets you the adaptation you want.
Whatever tickles your fancy, Mike.
Yeah.
I don't like that answer.
I'm not. Well, what do you want?
Logan's answer. Well, I think that there's like a continuum of like,
yeah, you're right.
You know, like good or optimal, tolerable, not okay. You know,
based on the exercises.
Yeah, I think so. You know, like if we talk like an
what exercise is not okay?
Well, I don't think any are not okay. I just think that people will choose the easiest one. So if you say go do triceps, and they're not going to go do full strip bench or push-ups, they're going to choose banded press downs and do them for sets of 100.
No,
that's the thing. Like I think to clarify that, it's like there's obviously better, like it for lower body. It's like, well, I would choose, RDLs or big compound accessory type lifts instead of like hip abductor
curls and leg extensions.
I will add to my session plan. The amount of volume, sets, reps, whatever it is going to be significantly higher in your power and your strength based exercises.
The focus
than what you would see normally, because I believe if you're trying to drive any adaptation, like those are going to be your main movements. Like keep the main thing.
So you're saying like the majority of your time is going to be spent on those first couple exercises as opposed to later.
Yes. Like we're not going to just come in and do 3 sets of 10 or 4 sets of 6 of squat. Like you're going to have like 4 warm-up sets of squat, and then you're going to have working sets of squat. And then depending on what you might have some drop sets or something like that. Like you should be able to
drop sets.
Yes. So you should be able to like the volume in those movements needs to be a lot higher than what people normally see to drive any adaptation that you want, because people get used to 4 sets of 6 way too easy.
It's interesting.
Hold that 4 sets of 6. Or 4 sets of 5.
What?
Depends how you load that. Because like you look at like some Jim Wendler stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like
I just mean like 4 sets. So like somebody just builds up, like does 1 set, like builds up those 4 sets of 6, like a really lightweight for the first 2 sets, and then the 3rd set is like medium, and then the 4th set is heavy.
Sure.
And then like you can progress that a little bit, but
to me, even doing it that way, and I see this sometimes on other coaches' cards, it's like, hey, we got 3x4 at 87.5%. Well, how did I get there?
Yeah.
And
so they don't have the warm-ups programmed in.
Correct. And so like, I know some guys will just be like, hey, you got 3 sets to warm up, and then you got this. Well, I mean, I've got some guys that won't know how to make appropriate jumps, So like from a safety standpoint, I think just helping them out with intensities along the way.
Yeah.
That's how I do it anyway. I think it's beneficial. And then you can kind of control the narrative in the warm up as well.
Yeah. But I was just trying to get at, like, from what I see other people doing, like the amount of volume they do in those main lifts, most of the time isn't enough.
So would you say, because I want to go back to the layout a little bit too, but like as opposed, or in terms of like how you train people throughout like a week, like would you say most of your training is total body?
Yes.
Like a session, like whether they train 2, 3, 4, it's full body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I get to 4, I might have like more of an emphasis on upper versus lower on like 2 versus 2 days. So like 2 days, maybe like more of an emphasis on upper body, and 2 days more of an emphasis on lower body, but I'm still hitting like a total body for all 4 days.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point I think we need to make. Cause I think you have, like whatever, if you lift 3 days a week, like you have some people who train full body 3 days a week. You have some people that do upper lower type splits. And then you have like the body part splits, which are basically all but worthless. But I think it's important to, I don't know, full body, I think is definitely beneficial, because it's like, we're not training, like we're trying to train for like a systemic hormone response. Like I don't want to just do arm blowout day,
Yeah.
For anybody that wants any results. I mean, if you just are going in there to pump the bodies up, then whatever, but I don't really care. But I think it's interesting because like that, that layout that you laid out, it's like, obviously that's like a template for, or a structure for athletes or whatever. And it's like, that's very similar to like Dave Tate's powerlifting layout. But I think that same layout can apply to anyone really, maybe minus, like we talked about that in a few episodes ago, like with the Olympic lifts, like you might not have a 40-year-old person do Olympic lifts who's not trained in sport, but like the same sort of thought process through like a day's training session still applies. So I remember like when I was starting, like I didn't understand like how to lay out a day. It's like, are we just squatting, or like how do we do that? But I think the point of like, like if you're training some like a random person, or whether it's a team or not, it's like that layout can still apply. Like sets and reps is more like getting into the weeds, but I think that layout is important to understand.
Yeah.
Once you have that base, then you can build off of that.
Even if you have, like, sometimes I even think about like, if you have someone who hasn't done, so say you have like a retired collegiate athlete or someone who's a little bit older and they haven't done any like power-based exercises, like I think you should throw those in there, because speed of contraction is also important. And like something that'll mess them up is like they don't do any of that for a long time, and then they all of a sudden one day have to like go do something really quick, and then like they strain something,
right? Because
they never trained that quick of a muscular contraction. So I think it's important for that to be in like anybody's program.
Yeah,
I think that to kind of put the bow on that, on the session, like you should just think most complex to most simple.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you're doing, if you're doing Olympic lifts or if you're not, or if you're just doing jumps and throws, you're going to warm up. Then your most complex movement will be first,
right?
And then next, and then you're next, and then you're next, until you're on to tricep cable pushdowns.
Yeah. So like that, like that's like old school by the book type, which is good. Like it's like most complex, meaning like your fastest lifts first.
Full body.
Yeah, the full body lifts, the fastest lifts, the most neurologically demanding. Like those are what you want to do first. So it's like even if you just think through it like that one aspect alone, I think that can just dictate how you lay out a whole day. It's like if I want to squat and bench and do push-ups and pull-ups and like, whatever, arms, like I want to lay it out like, okay, what's the hardest exercise to do? Squat. Okay, do it first. Bench, do it second. Pull-ups, push-ups, third and fourth. And then, like you just tier the thing like that, or you tier it or block it off. But that's a good way to think through like how to lay out a day. And I think that applies to everybody, and it's like, and then it just depends on who the person is and like how much they can tolerate. Like, you might have somebody who's never done anything before or just coming off injury, who you might only do the first 2 exercises, and then they might be done for the day just because they aren't ready for more. They don't need, like, if somebody hasn't trained a whole lot, it's like, what are their weaknesses? Well, everything. So why, like I'm not going to spend all my time doing accessory lifts. Like they need to train the main lifts, but those are like more individual based stuff. So you talked a little bit about like like if it was in different like time of year or like seasons for sports, things like that. So maybe there might be times like during the season, like, like I know if like games are on, Thursday, Saturday, and we talked about like, when you get into, if you do like 4 days, you might split it a little bit differently and do full body each day, but the emphasis might be different, so I know like for me personally, I would lay out the program for teams of, like if a game was on Thursday, Saturday, and we're lifting Monday, Wednesday, well, then I want to make sure like our main lower body day is as far away from the game as possible, just because it's most demanding, most fatiguing potentially. And then, so like I might do full body Monday and Wednesday, but Monday might be lower body priority. Wednesday might be upper body priority. If that makes sense. So like that's a way of like, technically that's an upper lower type split, but it's not like I'm only bench pressing and doing curls one day and then only doing squat the next. It's the emphasis is different and how hard the training is.
Well, and most sports have a high demand on the lower body, right? Whether you're talking about football, basketball, baseball, whatever. And if you're sore, if your lower body's sore, your ability to produce force is significantly decreased, right? So you can't be trying to squat one day before the game or 2 days before the game, because then you're just hitting into that window of
and not that you can't, but you can't like try to break a world record. Or it's probably not best to try to break a world record the day before a game.
Yeah.
For most people. Anything else on organizing training? I don't think we really covered a ton of it, but I think.
You can talk about in season versus off season. You can talk about like the off season itself, like different blocks. How you organize it. We talked about the session, obviously.
Yeah.
Even like during a week. Well, another aspect that people need to take into account is how much time they have.
Right.
Because if you're in season, maybe you only got 30 minutes. Okay, so what am I prioritizing, and where is it going?
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to that first thing we talked about too.
And so like how I do my in season. So we lift 4 days a week in season. We play Tuesday or Thursday, Saturday. So Monday's usually gonna be our hardest practice, which will also be our hardest lift. So I'm thinking about stress holistically, right? So Monday's our hardest practice. It's also our hardest lift. We'll probably squat or do some sort of low body movement. Then
like your most demanding lower body stuff.
Yes.
Right.
And what I have found is that either the day right before the game on Thursday, so that Wednesday, needs to be like high speed, very neurological based, or the guys respond well to like a heavier bench. So I could do that on the day before game, but more than likely it's going to be then a medium, more demanding upper body day for the day 2. Day 3 will be an Olympic lift or some sort of speed type of circuit. We'll play. We'll do a recovery session in between games.
So when you left 4 days a week in season, how long is each session?
20 to 30 minutes.
Yeah, so short total.
So like
Quick.
my accessory stuff gets then put into my warm up. So what I do,
yeah, I was gonna bring this up.
Yeah, so what I do is we do our, activation or ground-based mobility type stuff to get started. Just what I would call like a general warm up, and then we move into a specific warm up. And the specific warm up part is going to be 3 to 4 exercises that are complementary to whatever we're going to do that day. So if we're squatting that day, you better believe goblet squats in there, right? So along with those movements, it's going to be areas of deficiency. So for us, it's usually glute, low back, hamstring, posterior chain is what it is. Because basketball is a high anterior chain sport. A lot of deceleration. We're playing a very small area with really large people, so we're decelerating a ton, jumping a ton, repetitive jumps, and then from there, then I go into some sort of complex. So if we're doing clean that day, it'll be a clean complex, and it won't be a ton. It'll be really lightweight. Probably 6 reps, 5 exercises, 6 reps each. Maybe go through it once or twice. But my thought process there is in that warm up. So once from the beginning of the mobility portion to the end of the complex, we've done a ton of things, and it's not real heavy, but it all plays a role in getting them prepared for that lift. But it also is more frequency for the season. So our decrease in muscle mass is significantly less than it normally would if your frequency is only 2 days a week, or if your session, like I'm not doing an hour session, but I'm getting a lot of work done in 15 minutes, and then we go into our main movement, whatever that might be. So if it's squat, we squat, and then we're done, and then the guys go to practice.
Well, I think that's important because it's like that warm up is easy to blow through, I think, but I think that's probably the main or one of the most important things that you probably do in season, because it's like that's your way of sneaking in the things that are really important. Like you said, it's like, well, if we squat, we're going to squat that. And it's like that warm up is probably, the best way of, like you said, training deficiencies, like Nick talked about deficiencies or weaknesses. Like, well, the warm up is the perfect opportunity to sneak in volume for those things, because like we talked a little bit about like, power-based stuff or like our main strength or like, a lighter day. And it's like, in training, there's only so many variables to play with, like speed, load, volume. So like, and those things have to be trained. Like just because you're in season, like if you pull all your volume back, well, then they're probably going to lose muscle mass, increase body fat potentially. And same with like intensity. So you're trying to keep those things in the program strategically around games, especially in season. But it's like the warm up is your perfect opportunity to sneak in the volume on, stuff that you used to do in the off season and probably don't have time to in season, at the same point in the training session that you did. So you have to be creative and switch those things around, but you're still doing all the same stuff,
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of one of those things like, well, whatever you deem is important, like you talked about those things for basketball, for example, those are important. So you're probably going to do some variations of those things every single day that you have them.
Right. Yeah. We're always squatting, bridging, doing back extensions, GHDs, hypers. Like those are all staple of what we need to do for posterior chain development.
Right. Anything to add, Nick?
One thought that just came to me, you were kind of hitting on or emphasizing the point that you're trying to get the important things in. I guess one thing to think about is like, what is actually important, and do you have a reason for having it in the program? And if you can't come up with a reason or you can't deem it important, you need to cut it instantly. Yeah, especially in season.
I think that there's a time for fluff, and I wouldn't even say I fluff's a terrible word because I don't think any of
that's a terrible word.
I don't think anything in my programs are fluffy.
It's
Like any means. It's in the, it's if it's in there, it's important and it's in there for a reason.
Yeah, this is good.
But
Yeah.
you really like as if you took my programs and laid them all out and watched them across the calendar, you'll see the exercises that I find the most value in are consistent and are always there.
Right.
Yeah.
But like I might rotate out a couple other things, you know?
Yeah.
See, I heard that term, like there was somebody talking about Coach Moffitt who was at LSU, and they're like, yeah, he does not have it. They were like, there's no fluff in those programs. And I was like, what? This was like, 8 years ago. So I'm like, what does that even mean? And I'm like, now I'm like, I know what that means. Like, it means he is, whatever he's doing is big, main, complex stuff, and they don't waste any time. Like they are not on the hip in out machine. Like, like they're doing big stuff, Olympic lifts, squatting, benching, deadlifting, pull-ups. That's it. And like you said, like those things, and I'm the same way. It's like, there's like certain times of the year where maybe we have more time that other things can get added in, which isn't fluff. It's just extra accessories to hopefully build a better person, But when you have limited time, it's like, okay, what is the stuff that we have to do to make sure we're getting,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look,
go ahead.
No,
Okay. I was just going to say, if you can't come up with a reason of why it's in your program, like a legitimate reason, like it shouldn't be in there.
And I think that's important for a lot of reasons. Like if you're a college coach and you have to talk to coaches or like, coworkers, like you have to be able to justify what you're doing. Otherwise, get it out. It's pointless. And if you're working like in a private setting and somebody asks you like, well, hey, Coach Nick, why do you have me squat 50 sets of 5? Like you better be able to tell them why. Otherwise, they ain't coming back.
Yeah. And if you can't verbalize that to the athlete too, like that's a big trust loser there. You ain't gonna keep that.
That's good rule. No fluff.
Where does sprint development or running come into play with all this throughout a week?
Nick,
I know the answer. I'm just being.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can talk through it too. But Nick,
devil's advocate.
Devil's advocate. I mean, if you want to hit, like, I would throw in sprint mechanic. Like, okay, if you're in season and they're, playing and stuff, you can maybe touch it in the warm up if you want to, like, maybe fire up the nervous system or something like that. In the off season, I am definitely doing high, like, velocity training and top speed mechanics and everything, because I think if you don't do that, you're missing out on a very big, like, neurological system stimulus.
Yeah.
And posterior chain stimulus too for the hammies. But
how do you organize it? I mean, I know there's several different ways, but like,
you're talking to organize it in a session, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think
in a session, in conjunction with your weight room training, either on the same day or on different days, doesn't matter. But I know, so I know, like, I was always pretty good at, like, okay, here's the weight room. I know what's going on in the weight room. I know how to organize the weight room. But when it came to running, that was always more difficult for me to conceptualize. Like, how is this going to affect my weight room session? How much time am I going to be out here? How do I organize this session? The sprint session? Is it acceleration? Is it top end speed? Is it conditioning? How does that fall throughout the week? How does that affect practice? So, like, there's all those variables going into that. So just like quick snapshot of how you would organize sprint training.
Well, first, like
in seasons, we don't even talk about in season, because, like, unless you're a running sport, you're probably not running in season, like, because you got to practice. And, if we're practicing 3 hours a day, I'm not also doing change direction, right? So,
well, first let's talk about like where to put it in a day. Like we talked through, like, warm ups and activation, whatever, but then we talked through like the speed and how those things are more complex, and that's first. So, like, in my opinion, it's like, well, we're going to warm up and do our mobility, dynamic style stuff. Like that's where I think the flow of the day is really important. It's like we might start with stationary or like foam rolling, stationary mobility, stationary activation work, and then go into like full dynamic warm up as a group or individual. Then you do your speed, then move into weight room based stuff. So speed, Olympic lift, main strength, etc.
From foam rolling to the end of your speed, how long is that?
20 minutes tops. Because I like the way
that's a good thing for everybody to know, because you just set up stuff,
a ton of stuff.
So like if you
well,
don't know how to organize it, like that could easily turn into an hour, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, shit, now I don't have any time to lift.
But that's a good point. It's like, like it's like, okay, I got my lift plan, and my lift's going to take me 50 minutes. It's like, well, if you have if you work in college, you're going to have an hour a day, 3 or 4 times a week tops. So if you know lift's going to take 50 minutes, but then you do this whole warm up and all this sweet, cool stuff, and it takes 40 minutes. Well, then now it's like, well, now what do I do? Then you scramble mode. So and like, I always, especially with the running, like if you now, we covered where to put it kind of, but like if you're talking through like how it affects the lifting or whatever, it's like my goal with the running, which maybe is wrong. It's like, I always wanted to make sure I did so little that it didn't affect the lifting, So like, I mean, we would do, like all your mechanic work, but like, to me, it's like, that's just kind of an extension of a warm up, but like we're working on technique and, acceleration, top end speed,
reinforcing posture,
right? Like reinforcing mechanics and working on those things. And then doing, like, it's almost like opposite of like how I would lay out a weight room. It's like, we're trying to build up to like a sprint, like I'm not going to bring them into run and sprint and then work on mechanics. So it's almost kind of opposite, which is a little bit difficult, I think, to think through. But it's like, I'm trying to build, like, if we want to run like that day, we're going to run falling starts at the end, an acceleration type drill. Like I want to build up to that main stimulus. And then after that, then I'm done with the running. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does.
It's almost opposite of like how we just talked through the weight room of like, okay, speed and high demand first. Well, with the running, like that's last within the running session, I think.
You could almost think of it like Logan's in-season stuff, though, because in his warm-up, he does all of the parts, and then he does the whole at the end.
True. Yeah, true. Exactly.
Session, you do all the parts, and you do it the whole at the end.
True. Yeah, that's a good point. But I do think that's important. It's like you want to think through that as like, hey, I'm trying to work on things to get to what I want. So like, Logan said, is it, I'm not going to do a whole bunch of top end speed mechanics and then do a change of direction drill. It's pointless. But I'm going to do change of direction mechanics, lateral mechanics, and then do a change of direction drill or an agility drill, But like, we talked about that, and that's how we used to do it. Like all of us, it was pretty quick to get through those things, warm up, running.
If we're talking off season for me, and I've done this probably the last, I don't even know how long, forever. I've done it the same way, more or less since Omaha, is that we always sprinted first before we were in the weight room. So in the summer, I usually get like an hour and 10 minutes. So then my sprint sessions anywhere from 20 to 25.
Yep.
And we go to the weight room, and then whatever I'm doing, whether it's acceleration, change of direction, or top end speed, that's going to complement whatever we're doing in the weight room. And then on our last day, if we condition, then we condition after the lift.
On the last day of the week.
On the last day of the week. Or so say you're conditioning twice a week, right? So maybe you're not spending a ton of time on, or maybe you're combining your acceleration and some of your lateral mechanics, your change of direction in one day, and then doing top speed another. Maybe those 2 days that falls before the lift, and on those days you're doing more like power type stuff in the weight room, so it complements whatever you're doing in the weight room. The other 2 days you're doing conditioning, or you're going to do, maybe you're doing strength stuff before, then you're going out to the field to run, or maybe you're lifting in the morning and conditioning in the evening, or something like that.
Yeah. And I think like sports, especially, it makes this all like very difficult, and it blurs the line. Like, cause I think like if you're training an Olympic sprinter, it's like, aligning those factors is super, super important. But like, like I think it's easy to get lost in like trying to align, like, if I do linear speed, I want to make sure I'm training this exactly in the weight room. And it's like, okay, or like the conditioning thing. It's like, well, we had speed planned, but they practice first. It's like, so what's the point of doing like a whole bunch of falling starts and running when they just came off the court? Like, so those things I think get real blurred.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost and like trying to sync all that stuff up. And it's like, well, you're going to do all this running and conditioning, and like, then they're going to go play pickup or they're going to go practice. And it's like, so how exact do we need to be?
Yeah. 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 I think that's a really good point. And nothing's better than that point, like when it comes to like plyometrics, because I always get hung up with like interns and stuff. We're talking about plyometric progressions and that sort of thing. And it's like, okay, cool, you want to start all the way back to the beginning with your plyo progression, but in 30 minutes, your guy is going to be sprinting down the court as hard as they can, leaping off of one foot and doing a tomahawk slam,
getting hit in midair.
So like literally the most explosive, aggressive, demanding plyometric ever. But we're going to work on snap downs, like, and I'm not saying like you shouldn't do snap downs. Like, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is like your progression needs to be a lot faster than you think it does.
Yeah. And it's also like, let's not make this more difficult on ourselves than it has to be. Like I don't want to do progression freaking whiz bang 4,000. Like, it doesn't matter, like, it's like, I always viewed like the weight room and like, even like the running stuff. It's like, that is just, it's general basic training. So instead of worrying about like, oh, I'm going to do this rotational jump onto the box and over this, barbell, whatever. It's like, well, just do the basic stuff and make sure that they land correctly off the box and jump hard and like, like coach the general aspects of the movement without making it so complicated that you have to sit there and spend 20 minutes explaining that. And like you said, then they're going to literally go on the field and run as hard as they can for an hour and do 50,000 plyometrics. I don't know.
What was it? We got a minute 30. What was the other topic we were supposed to talk about?
Squat technique, but I think that's going to be.
Oh, we ain't getting to that.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can cover it. Can you cover it in 90 seconds?
No.
All right.
I've seen 11-minute videos on squat technique.
Yeah. But I mean, I think this is a good spot, I think, to stop. And then
we can go so much further into just organization and like at the 10,000 foot view of what training is. Like, we can talk ad nauseum about organization because there's so many variables that come into play from a daily, weekly, monthly basis.
Yeah.
That you have to consider.
Yeah.
And it's never going to be perfect. And there's always going to be something that messes it up. But at the same time.
Well, maybe we'll plan on picking up from there next time, and we'll talk more about organization stuff.
Cool.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, everyone.